Um, sorry. So welcome to the League of Women Voters DEI program tonight on Juneteenth. And our speaker is no stranger to the League. Our good friend Daquan Love is the former executive director of the NAACP Virginia. And now he's the principal at Reflex, sorry, I just lost it, Reflex Strategy. Daquan, I don't know if there's anything else you want to tell us about your current role, but welcome and thank you for joining us tonight.
Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me, Deb and Joan and the League, such great friends. I feel like I'm amongst family this evening. So I think that, you know, in terms of introductions, that does it. But, you know, briefly, I am proud to be the principal of Reflex Strategy Group. We are a full service political fundraising firm, primarily serving the Mid-Atlantic region. So we work with clients in North Carolina and Virginia, primarily state legislative races, with the goal of helping them to raise money for their campaigns. And so we are really excited about the growth of our firm in this small period, but moreover, very delighted about how we are able to help expand our progressive values through the electoral process. And of course, this is a 501c4 organization, so the League does not endorse or support candidates, and so I want to make sure we give that disclaimer because I know that drill. But that all being said, I'm super excited to be here. Do we want to jump in, or were there any other beginning housekeeping items on your end?
If you have questions for Daquan, please put them into the chat, or maybe there's a Q&A button. We'll probably find it either way. And that's probably the easiest way to handle those.
Yes, so I do have some, I do have a specific way I like to do that. So let's go over that before I start the PowerPoint presentation. First and foremost, and before I put up the screen, I want to be very clear. When we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, this can be and will be and should be a difficult conversation. And so I want to begin our thought process tonight by allowing ourselves to make space for the difficult conversations, the difficult thoughts and feelings that are bound to present themselves this evening, okay? And so that being said, one, this is a safe space. This is a judgment-free zone. I want you to feel comfortable to ask any question that you feel that you can ask, which is why I really would love for you to use the Q&A feature. If you're joining via telephone, via cell phone, and you're using the app, you still should have the ability to do Q&A. But here's why I really want you to utilize the Q&A function, because within Zoom, and hopefully the settings will allow us to, you should be able to submit a question anonymously that allows you to have that free reign and that free feel. I want to make sure that we can ask and answer your questions. There's so many in today's social period of cancel culture and political correctness. There are a few opportunities where we have the opportunity to actually ask the burning questions and really seek to understand and to gain clarity. And so I want to begin off by saying this is that opportunity. And so no question is going to be taken offensively. I won't be offended, and our participants won't be offended, because we know that this is a safe space, and also this is an opportunity for us all to learn. And even me, through your questions and through the dialogue that we will have this evening, I will learn as well. So we all will be learning this evening. I love for a few folks, so in terms of question and answers, the way I like for this to happen is this. I'd like for you to use the Q&A box throughout the session. So if you have a question, I want you to put it in the Q&A box as soon as you have it. Feel free to use the anonymous feature if you would like, okay? And once you do that Q&A, I'm gonna do my best to answer these questions throughout the session as they come up, because what I know I don't like doing is going to a session, especially a 2-hour-long session, and then you wait until the end and then you're asking a question about slide number 2. That's not what we want to do. We want this to be intentional. This is very much your session. So that being said, we're going to take it at a pace that is appropriate for this group. If we go through and I know Joan and I think Deb have seen the presentation, it's very in-depth. So, I want to answer your questions. I want you to leave this session having felt that your questions have been answered, having had the opportunity to think critically, having the opportunity to think in a new and challenging way. And that really is success, how we're going to define success for this program. So that being said, I need you to participate. I'm going to be very clear up front, as I normally am, and very direct. This session is not going to be beneficial if you don't participate. I'm going to say that again. This session is not going to be beneficial if you do not participate. I need for all 43 people on this line to ask questions, but moreover, I want you to use the chat box feature, which is different, the chat box feature to have a kind of an offline conversation. I want you to put in your amens and put in your, oh, this is interesting. I want you to engage that way. And so I want you to set a goal for yourself. Each one of you should be making some sort of a comment, whether it's okay or this is making me think, or I'm not sure. I want you to really engage in the chat box. And so I'm going to be asking several little poignant discussion questions as we go through, and I want you to put your information in the chat box. Now, if we go through this, y'all, okay, and you're not participating in the chat box, and it's 2 people participating, it's only Deb and Joan, you're not going to walk away from the session with leaving with the benefits of this conversation. And truly, I want to say this with the utmost respect, this opportunity. There are very few opportunities right now to have this open, honest, and safe dialogue. And so I hope that you will take advantage of it. I see Meg, she said, I'm ready. Excellent. She said, I'm ready. Is there anybody else ready? Anyone else ready? Put ready in the comment box. Right there, you know what? This group of people, I think we're gonna be all right. Because one thing I can't stand is a dead space group of people. And this is not that. I love it, I love it, I love it. Perfect. You know what? You're giving me energy, positive energy already. Let's go ahead. Let's get started. Awesome, awesome. All right. See, Deb, you got the right people on the call today. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen. When you can see my screen, I want you to say, I see it, I see it. I see, okay, I see it, perfect, perfect, perfect. Now, Joan and Deb, you're gonna help me. I want you to interrupt me if you see that we have some questions in the chat. I'm trying to go through a lot of different things here, but you can just come off mute and say, hey, we got a question. I see there's a first question.
You got a question.
Yes. I'm perfect. And that person was able to do it anonymously, so perfect. You can feel free to jump in. This is going to be interactive. I'm going to answer that one live, and y'all are going to hold me accountable, make sure I answer it. Thank you, John. I see it. Wonderful, wonderful. Excellent, excellent. Perfect. Excellent. So let's go back to slide number 1. Okay. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. So first off, I want to thank everyone for joining us for this extremely important training that I am proud and honored to be sharing with all of you on today, okay? You know, the League of Women Voters they're truly friends of mine, and I'm so grateful for Deb's leadership, Joan's leadership, for having me today and letting me share this very important message of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm excited to share my story, hear some of yours, and work together to improve not only our communities, but our society at large. Now, I may be the speaker today, but like I said, I cannot do this without you. I need all of you to tell me your thoughts, tell me your opinions. What comes to mind when we talk about what we are doing this evening? There's going to be some activities, there's going to be some discussions, because in reality, that is when the breakthroughs happen. Those discussions, those conversations. I'm seeing a technical question. Can we have the slide bigger? It's difficult for folks to see. Let me see what we can do about that. We're going to try that. Thank you for bringing that up. I think I might be able to do something. Give me 1 second to change a setting on my device. I appreciate your patience. Let me see if we can make that bigger. Okay. You probably can't see anything right now, and that's fine. Give me a moment. Perfect. No, that's not perfect. Oh Lord. Okay. Keep changes. I need. That's there. Perfect. Apply. Okay. Perfect. Just give me 1 second, friends. Thank you so much. Okay, let me see if this screen is going to come up here. Y'all are so helpful. Thank you for your patience as I try to move and maneuver around here with this screen process. I tried to call myself being fancy with the slide view, and it's just not as exciting as I want it to be. So 1, 2, 3. I think we are good. I'm going to try sharing now and see if this will work. All right, let me pull this up over here. Are the slides bigger now? I can't really see. Okay, perfect. It says, I think so. Perfect. Let me move these things around. And thank you so much. Okay, perfect. Boom, boom. One more setting to change, just to make sure that, okay, perfect. Perfect, okay, great. All right, so that being said, I'm looking over here, I have my chat box open, we can see, we answered that question. Perfect, excellent. See how responsive that is? Excellent, this is excellent. All right, so now where is my other screen? I'm not seeing my screen. I am not seeing my screen. Give me 1 moment. I appreciate your patience. We're gonna get this. I need to see presenter view. Thank you. Can folks still see the screen? Is it big like it should be, or we haven't?
No, we don't see it now, Daquan.
We don't see it at all. Okay. You know, technology can be something else.
Yeah.
What about now? How are we doing now? We can't see it now?
Nope.
No. Hold on. Yes or no? Not now?
Nope.
This is just not letting me be great today. All right, so here's what we're gonna do. Let me try slideshow. All right, let me pull this up here. Hopefully, let's see if this works. Yes or no? Can we see it now? We can't see that? Nope, we see it, yes. Okay, great.
Yes, we're good.
Okay, perfect. Wonderful, wonderful, excellent. I'm glad that y'all can see it, even though I really can't. Okay, so we're gonna get there. All right, so we're gonna talk about some very important topics today, and I really cannot. Now I can't see Deb, and okay, we'll just go through there, but y'all can still see me. Okay, right? Is that correct? Okay, perfect. I can't see anyone, so just bear with me. Thank you. We're going to talk about some important topics today, but I do hope that you leave with some new perspectives and understandings of the world that is around you. Let's go ahead. Let's get started. So I'd like to start with a quote from none other than the incredible Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In his book, Why We Can't Wait, he wrote that, quote, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We're caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied in a single moment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. We're all aware of the incredible legacy that Dr. King left behind. But few of us really take the time to think about his ideas and beyond a basic understanding of equality. He wasn't just fighting for civil rights, he was fighting for a better society, a society where we work together, where we lift each other up, a society where one's success is everyone's success. And he told us that if we have inequalities in our ways of life, regardless of who or how many people it's directed towards, true justice and equality cannot be achieved. It doesn't matter how much progress we make. It doesn't matter how much good that we do. It does not matter how much service that we complete. If we have inequalities in the way that our community, our society operates, true justice and equality cannot be achieved. He wrote not to disregard the experiences of some, but to elevate the truths of all. Community. This idea of community and the idea that without ensuring we all have just and fair experiences, none of us can. This understanding was crucial nearly 60 years ago, and it's just as important here today. It's more than necessary to have these conversations, and I'm looking forward to discussing them with you as we dive into diversity, equity, and inclusion today. Before we continue, I'd love for you to take a moment, take about 30 seconds, and I want you to drop in the chat box what this quote means to you as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, before you ask questions, I want to be clear in my intentions. We have not defined diversity, equity, and inclusion just yet, and that is okay. I want you to tell me how you believe this quote deals with diversity, equity, and inclusion from your perspective now. And then we'll come back to this at the end of our presentation to see if your perspective has changed, if any. So I want you to take about 30 seconds and provide that in the comment box below. I want to give folks maybe another 15 seconds. I know we have some fast typers, but I want to make sure we are giving enough wait time to those who may not be as quick typers. Excellent. I love what I'm seeing in the chat. I want to elevate a few thoughts that were provided here. Alice said the quote is the why of DEI. I couldn't agree with you more. Every injustice matters and affects us all. Excellent. We need to care about each other. Yes. Yes. Oh, I love what Fran said. She says, just from a practical point of view, you may not be the target of injustice at this moment, but your turn may come next. Your turn may come next. Powerful. Our interconnectedness is indisputable. Absolutely, absolutely. We're all in this together, absolutely. Society is stronger when the member with the least amount of resources, whatever those resources are, is lifted up. Absolutely. I think an easy or a simple way to say this is that we're all in this together. Thank you for that. Thank you for your comments. I love that. How do we go to the next slide? I think I've shared a little bit about me and who I am at Reflex Strategy Group. So I want to talk a little bit about Reflex Strategy Group. Specifically, Reflex Strategy Group specializes in helping minority, rural, and first-time candidates crush their fundraising goals. And trust me, I'm going to come back around. I know I'm Baptist, but I promise you I'm going to get to a point here in talking about my company. The reasoning behind this is something we're going to be talking quite a bit about today. Equity. Not equality, but equity. Go ahead and type equity in the chat if you're still with me. Let me get your opinion on something, and I want you to use the chat box to answer this. We all know that incumbent political candidates have quite a few advantages in elections compared to their competitors, whether it's a primary or a general election. They have experience, resources, and strategies. A lot of candidates, specifically first-time candidates, don't have access to. The biggest things in politics that can be a determining factor for success in a campaign is money. In the 2021 election for Virginia House of Delegates, how much more did incumbents and current electeds have 30 days before the election? For every dollar in the bank that challengers had, challengers to incumbent candidates, how many dollars do you think the incumbents had? And the reality is that 30 days before the November election of 2021, incumbents had an average monetary advantage of $128 in their account for every dollar that challengers had. In fact, there were only 4 instances in the entire Commonwealth where incumbents didn't have a funds advantage. Right before their election, a peak time for fundraising, challengers had a single dollar for every 128 that the incumbent opposition had. Now, as someone who works in the professional political fundraising field, I can tell you that that's not something you want to be looking at in the final days of your campaign. There's a clear disparity, and that disparity grows even wider when you think about minority candidates, rural candidates, and first-time candidates. There's a clear disparity between who raises money and who doesn't. One of the reasons I started Reflex Strategy Group was to help lower the barriers and challenges that are presented to first-time candidates who often have to face incumbents with loads of experience and resources. We're also trying to diversify our legislature and legislatures in the Mid-Atlantic region that dictate so many parts of our lives. Last year, there were 7 men for every 1 woman in the Virginia House of Delegates. We've brought that down to a ratio of 4 to 1 this year, but our work is far from over. We need to keep supporting rural, minority, and first-time candidates to get into office to make our legislatures and governments more diverse, equitable, and inclusive. The League of Women Voters has, for over 100 years, done the work of DEI, whether you admit it or know it or acknowledge it or not. Because the League of Women Voters is sought to make sure that the voices and the votes of women in this Commonwealth and across this country are heard. That is addressing an injustice and inequity within our Commonwealth and within our society. And so when we think about DEI in the framework of the League of Women Voters, we have to acknowledge and think about the fact that everything that you do as a league, from voter registration to census work to redistricting reform, all impacts our work in diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is why this training is so vital and so important, because you as a league cannot live up to your values without having a deep awareness and a deep understanding and a true acknowledgement of what diversity, equity, and inclusion is. And so on this Juneteenth evening, the holiday in which we celebrate the 2.5 years difference from the emancipation of African Americans to the acknowledgement and the announcement in Galveston, Texas of said announcement. It is more important now than ever that the League of Women Voters continue its phenomenal mission-driven work in our communities through a broader lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. If you agree with that, go ahead and say, I agree, type okay. You can even say amen in the chat. Let me know you. Diversity, equity, inclusion. We've heard those words before on our jobs, in our homes, on Twitter, on social media. But what exactly do those words mean? What does diversity mean? What does equity mean? What does inclusion mean? What's the relationship between them? Have they already been achieved? Or is there more work that needs to be done? What can we do to make them more prevalent in our lives? These are just a few of the questions that we hope to address tonight. To get a foundation, we're going to look at a few basic definitions. But Patty just put up a good point. Patty, thank you for putting that in there. Emily's List was founded in 1985 to help women candidates, and their motto, which is the namesake, Emily is not a person, is actually an acronym for early money is like yeast, because it makes the dough rise. Funding resources are critical for first-time candidates, women, and candidates of color. And I am very proud of the fact that I am an Emily's List certified fundraiser. Emily's List gave me the training, the initial training to do fundraising. And actually, they're one of the few groups that actually has been working to get more African Americans and people of color in the fundraising political space. Thank you, Patty, for sharing that. I don't know what I corrected, Patty, but you're good. First word, diversity. Go ahead and define diversity in the chat box for me. What do you think diversity means? Not the same. Yes. What do you think diversity is? Everyone who is not you, okay? I said money when it should have been dough. Oh, it's all good, Patty, it's all good. Differences, representing all people, accepting differences, differences of all kinds, variety. Diversity is nature's insurance policy. Carolyn, would you care to expound upon that? I'm interested to see what do you mean by nature's insurance policy? This is interesting. I'd love to hear more about that.
When I was a kid, all the bananas were something called Gros Michel. They were clones. They were all the same. They were beautiful. They were big. They were tasty. And they got hit by a virus. And they all died because they were all the same.
You know, that makes perfect sense, Carolyn, because if we were all the same, a very homogeneous society, you know, we would not have we would not be able to survive as a species, let alone as a society. So that's a very good point. Thank you for sharing that. Also, just so everyone knows, I cannot see any one of you all. So if it looks like I'm not being, I'm trying to look at the camera, but like I literally can't see anyone on my screen. So y'all bear with me here. I wanted to learn more before I commit to a definition. I appreciate your transparency. Mari includes race, gender, age, and disabilities. Yes. Different in any manner of appearance, behavior, ableness. Diversity makes us all stronger. Deb says we're here. Excellent. As long as y'all here and y'all can see, we good to go. Diversity. First up, at the start of DEI is diversity. Diversity is defined as the practice of quality of including or involving people from a range of different social and ethnic backgrounds and of different genders, sexual orientations, etc. Now, we're not going, let me be clear about this. This is not a textbook definition. This is not something that's going to be gold stamped on the wall, because everyone defines diversity differently. And guess what? That's okay. This is not one of those things where we're going to go and say, I'm saying, my definition is better than your definition, etc. Because at the end of the day, diversity means we're all trying to include everybody. We're all in this together. I want you to take a note of the use of the word in my definition here, including. I don't know if I can annotate. I'm going to try to annotate. Let's see if this works. Including. Y'all see that? Can y'all see that? Wonderful. Including. Because we're going to be back to that word in a little bit. The United States has not had a pretty history with the idea of diversity. Let's go back. Let's go back to 1607 in Jamestown. When Captain John Smith brought over his folks from the Virginia Company of London. Let's be clear, the Virginia Company of London, the group that came over and settled and created the first, Virginia colony here in America, they all paid their way to get on that boat to come over here. That was not a diverse group of people. It was a group of wealthy, white England elites who purchased their way onto a boat to get over here. Can anyone think of a modern day comparison? I got one, but I'm curious to know if you're thinking of the same thing. Deb is always on top of it. Absolutely, same thing as SpaceX, right? So you have, very wealthy people spending money to go to a new space. Was there diversity at the Virginia Company of London? No. They came over here. Did they initially include our Native American friends? No. They used them. They used the Native Americans that were here because the Native Americans knew how to grow and to plant crops and to harvest crops here in this land. They used them. They did not include them. Somebody type in the chat box, they used them. They did not include them. There's a difference. And so even when we think about the whitewashing of American history, and we think about, this beautiful, Thanksgiving story, okay? And we think about, how Native Americans and the indigenous people and their kindness and their generosity gave these crops. Let's be clear. They were used, okay? They came over here with these guns, which with the indigenous people were not used to, did not see. Now, let me ask you this. If you had never seen one of them guns from the 1600s, and you were an indigenous person, and they came over here and you can see that this thing is shooting things, I would be trying to give them some props too. Hello, somebody. Hello, somebody. They were used. They were not included. When we think about 1619, and our chat box is getting a little quiet, so help me out. Help me out if help me out. And when we think about 1619, when the English settlers realized that there were some challenges, they realized there were some problems, they realized that, hey, we actually got to do work. They realized, hey, this is hard work over here in Jamestown. And we go back to the fact that these were wealthy elites that came over to Jamestown. How many wealthy elites do you know today over here trying to plant crops and grow a colony? Folks thought that this was going to be fun and games and exciting. They eventually brought over their wives and their children. Now, they knew it was going to be hard. They knew it was going to be rough, but they used the Native Americans. And then by 1619, 12 years later, they said, we got to use somebody else because we're not going to be planting these crops. And obviously, these are overbroad generalizations, but it's really the fact of the matter. So that's when the first Africans were brought over to Point Comfort here in Virginia. Now, some of you will ask the question, what does the indigenous people, what does the first African Americans have to do with diversity? Because I want to be clear, and we all need to be mindful of the fact that when people try to whitewash our history and they try to paint a picture in which they say that, the indigenous people were part of this and this was very diverse and even some versions of history books, they try to say that the Africans were treated very well and they volunteered. There ain't no African volunteer to get on that ship to come over to Point Comfort. Hello, somebody. So diversity is the practice or quality of including. What has historically happened is we have used not included. Somebody put that in the chat box. They used, they did not include. And so that, my friends, is the antithesis to diversity. We're going to talk about this evening, how do we get to diversity? We talked about our history, a very brief history of our lack of diversity in this Commonwealth. But even today, we're still seeing the detrimental effects of policies, of laws that have systematically made diversity not even an option in some cases. We have codified the antithesis to much of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. When you think about redlining, which is truly one of the biggest barriers to financial freedom for African Americans and descendants of slaves in this country. When we think about gerrymandering, which continues to rear its ugly and divisive head, even here in this Commonwealth. For so many years, folks in the minority in this country have had to fight to get even the most basic sense of equality, not even equity yet, equality. It's no help that for centuries, our government has been run by a notably undiverse group of people, to say the least. But as time goes on, we're starting to see a shift to a more diverse population and the systems that impact us all on such major levels. We're finally starting to see some representation in government. I want to go back to that phrase, being used or being included. Diversity is not using people. Diversity is not us, we have a Black person. Let's use them to talk to the Black people. Diversity is including the Black person and asking and soliciting for their input, not to speak on behalf of all the people in the community, but including them in decision making, including them in leadership positions, and having a seat at the table. Somebody say it's about time. Pamela said it's including more than one of a group, treating them as equals. It's about time. It's about time. It's getting quiet in the chat. It's getting quiet in the chat. Long overdue. Ooh, Deb says this also means not controlling the narrative. Exactly. The main way that you can really think about that I've come to put together is in terms of, are you really embracing diversity? Is, are you using or are you including? Absolutely, Pamela. Let me tell you, Pamela's about to get an award because she said you need more than one person of a group to be represented so they aren't expected to speak for a group. Absolutely. I'll ask you this question since we're on this topic here. Since we're on this topic, this is going to be a challenging question. And I really hate that I can't see people's faces right now. But I'm going to stop sharing because I want to see your faces when I ask you this question. All right. You can still see me, right? You hear me? Okay, perfect. Imagine you, any one of you, were on a committee of 15 people, and you were the only woman on that committee that was making decisions about women, how would you feel? What burdens might be intentionally or unintentionally placed upon you? What responsibility might you feel obligated to, not just yourself, but to an entire constituency of people that you are expected to represent? I want to hear more people in the chat box. I want you to think of this. Meg is on the point. Being one woman does not qualify me to represent women. But not just the representation piece. How would you feel going into that committee meeting? You would feel frustrated, burdened, stressed, crappy, tokenized. Ooh, tokenized, that's the word. What about overwhelmed? Excellent. Tokenized, insecure, pressured. Been there years ago, stopped caring what all the males thought. That's bold. That's very bold. But everyone can't say that. Everyone doesn't have that in that strength. And quite frankly, while it's admirable that you do, is it fair for us to place that level of burden and stress on other people? Because at that point, are we using you or are we including you? So when we think about diversity and we think about bringing other people to our local chapters of the League of Women Voters, yes, we may have one Hispanic person in our chapter, and we may be so excited. But putting them on every committee ain't gonna solve the problem of diversity. Hello, somebody. And if you think about it and put yourself in their shoes, they probably are already intimidated. They may already feel like, I don't really know if this is for me. They may already feel unincluded. So put yourself in their shoes in these situations. But I want to take a step back for a second. And I want you to think about this as well. You're going to have points in which you have people from different racial backgrounds. You're going to have people from different ethnicities. You're going to have people from different communities. You're going to have people from South Side versus North Side. Everyone has a variety of representations that they claim to represent, or they claim, or maybe they don't even claim to represent. But the key in diversity is making sure that you are including them and not just using them. Also, let me tell you, Alice just took the words out of my mouth. She said, we need to be deliberate about diversity. It's not going to happen unless we actually do something to make it happen. Which is why the other piece that I want to challenge you to do is this. Sometimes, friends, we can be so in our heads, so uppity, and so trying to be politically correct that we don't create safe spaces within our own communities and our own groups to be able to have the conversation with the person. So, for example, if we haven't created a friendship or a relationship to work together outside of the work that we're doing, you're not going to create a safe space where you feel comfortable having a difficult conversation. Now, I can remember a few months ago, Deb and I had a very difficult conversation. And, we were working in a group, a coalition. And because I had a relationship with Deb, I felt comfortable to express to her the difficulty that I had, how this made me feel. And we both were able to plot together a solution to fix the problem. And we were allies in the situation. Now, had I not had built, and Deb had not built that working relationship, we wouldn't have been able to have that transparent conversation. Because in reality, when we think about diversity, it's not just including them at the meeting, it's including them at the potluck too. Okay, I see a hand raised. Who has a hand raised, Deb? I know we're going a lot.
I believe Pat has her hand raised.
Hey, Pat, go ahead.
I am sorry. I guess I'm non-technical because I didn't mean to raise my hand.
It's okay. It's okay.
I had my hand raised, but I am so enjoying this and I so appreciate you, Daquan, for being here tonight. We needed this. Thank you. Keep going.
You're very welcome. Very welcome. Hey, Denise, I see Denise. Oh, my good friend Denise. It's so good to see you. Oh, see your name on the chat box. And what do I mean by that? So many times when we have and I want to be very intentional here, because I know one of the goals that the league has is to diversify its chapters. And y'all, let's be honest, the League of Women Voters ain't too different from the Oscars. It's a little white, and that's all right, right? But here's the thing: the first thing we got to do is acknowledge it. Hello, somebody, we got to acknowledge it. Am I right? We acknowledge it. Get the cat out the bag, right? Get the elephant out of the room. Because if we can't acknowledge it ourselves, if we can't be open and have this dialogue together as friends and family internally, well, how do you think we're going to get diversity in the chapters? And let's be clear, we've got to not be, it's not about tokenism. It's not about getting a few names on the roll. It ain't even about putting a few faces on the website that look different. What it is about is, let's acknowledge the fact maybe we don't have diverse chapters, or maybe we have diverse chapters because we're diverse in so many other aspects, but we're not going to use that as an excuse to not be racially diverse either. White older women has been the tradition. That's perfectly fine. And let me tell you, you can have tradition and you can have contemporary all at the same time. Because those older white women were once young themselves. Did I lie or something? Or were they old their whole life? I don't know. Did they wake up old? I don't know, right? I'm sure somebody's gonna be offended by that comment, but let me be clear, it's out of love. And also, we are having a transparent and honest dialogue, because if we can't be honest either, where can we be honest? And if we can't acknowledge a problem, just like the Alcoholics Anonymous, their first step is admit the fact that they're an alcoholic. Because if you can't admit that there is a problem exists, if we can't all agree that the house is on fire, then how are we going to get together a strategy to put the fire out? We're over here debating on paint colors and the house on fire. Don't make sense. So diversity, we've got to use, not include. No tokenism. That means making sure we are including them, not just at the committee meeting, but at the potluck too. Building relationships. All of this is just basic human stuff, right? Build relationships with people. Be intentional. It is okay to also be vulnerable. Be vulnerable. Be able to have the confidence in yourself to build a relationship. Take the new person out for coffee and say, hey, I just want to let you know, our chapter is struggling with diversity right now. We're so grateful to have you on board. What I'm committing to do is to make sure that we are including you and not using you. But I want to be clear, this is going to be an uphill battle. But I want your help, because our chapter is mission driven. We've been mission driven since over 100 years. And build that relationship. And I guarantee you, if you build that relationship from the very beginning based on trust and honesty, instead of tokenism and non-inclusivity, you will have a strong chapter. Pamela, I know vulnerability is very scary, but it is in moments of fear and moments of crisis that we actually grow the most. And I know that many of us may be set in our ways. That's all right. Well, that's a couple things. One, we got to acknowledge that first. Secondly, let's be mindful. Everybody in the chapter ain't the most appropriate person to be building relationships with people. Oh, Meg, did you want to come off mute and expound upon that? That's such a great point.
Well, I think I said it. I have to share, I belong to an organization that asked me to be the state DEI. Can you see me?
I can't see you, but I can hear you.
Well, I should not be the state DEI by myself. But reaching out to other people in the organization to ask about why they wouldn't, or why they would, or what would make them interested in being that representative. It's about making yourself vulnerable and asking the question and being open to the answer, which may be awkward or difficult. You know, it's just being open to it.
Absolutely. You got to be open. If you can't be open, honest, and transparent, you're fighting half the battles internally. Half the battles are going to be fought internally before you even get to any major decisions or address any of the problems in our community. Because anything you do is going to be halving it. You're going to be halving it. Thank you for sharing that, Meg. Oh Lord, it's 8 o'clock and we just got on diversity. I haven't even talked about equity or inclusion. Oh, are you ready? Oh. Diversity is such an important piece of our society. It's been left out for far too long. I'm going to go ahead and go back to my next screen, which means I won't be able to see you. Let's see. Okay. No, that's not it. Chat box. There we go. Okay, perfect. Folks, can you see the screen? Yep. Okay, great.
You're good.
When we embrace diversity, we are bringing each other together for the greater good. We get new experiences, new perspectives, new lives that can expand our worldview and bring new ideas to the table. It's without a doubt one of the most important things of today that should be shared and taught: diversity. Now, before we, as we move forward, I want you to also make a note to see diversity as a practice. What that means is it's not just a one and done. This is continuous. We're going to hone in on that idea later in this presentation. It's vital. Excuse me. It's vital that we note the differences between what's called active and passive diversity. Has anyone ever heard of active and passive diversity? Yes or no in the chat. Okay. No worries, no worries. We're gonna delve deep into it. Are you ready to go deep? Are you ready to go deep? Let me know. Are you ready to go deep? Yes, yes. Let's get deep on that. Whew. Next slide. Next slide. Active versus passive diversity. While we always want to be encouraging diversity, there's a specific type we want to pursue and a type we want to avoid. Active diversity can be described as someone or a group of people taking an active role, if you will, in promoting diversity. This means being proactive instead of being reactive. Taking steps to diversify and to embrace the differences that we have without being told or forced to. This means recognizing the benefits of having a diverse group and understanding how having a wide array of experiences, perspectives, and opinions can serve to improve our lives. What we don't want to have, my friends, is passive diversity. Working to increase diversity in order to check a box or to reach a number, this type of action fails to see the actual benefits of diversity and pursues it simply as a form of validation. Now, friends, I know that there's a initiative from the League of Women Voters to do DEI. Now, you may have come into this session thinking that this is a check the box. I'm gonna go watch my little DEI. I'm gonna go and we're gonna learn. We're gonna talk about Juneteenth and we're gonna ask a few questions. I'm gonna sit on the Zoom. I'm gonna be quiet and I'm gonna go home and nothing else has changed. That's called passive diversity. The presence of active and passive diversity is important when we're seeing diversity as a practice. Remember, practice meaning that we're doing it continuously, not just one and done. There are different ways to practice it with different goals and reasons behind it. A business can practice diversity, but fail to meet the ideals of diversity, equity, and inclusion. That takes us back to the concept of using people instead of including people, right? That's because diversity is just one piece of the puzzle. And up next is equity, the most misunderstood of the three. But before we finish between active and passive diversity, the question that I want you to ask yourselves, and you don't have to put this in the chat for once, is am I practicing active or passive diversity? And I want you to not just ask this question tonight, but as you go throughout the next several months and as you're implementing your DEI initiatives in your chapters and in the league across the Commonwealth of Virginia, are you practicing active or passive diversity? Are you simply trying to check a box? Are you simply trying to fill a grant report filled out? Are you simply going through the motions? Or are you being vulnerable, being transparent, having the open and honest dialogue, and doing what needs to be done to achieve diversity in your league? All right, we're at equity. We're at equity. We can define equity as the act of promoting justice, impartiality, and fairness within the procedures, processes, and distribution of resources by institutions or systems. Now, when many people hear of equity, their mind immediately goes to equality. The definition seems so close, so why not? But the importance of the distinction between the two cannot be understated. These two go hand in hand, but they are not one. Let's take a closer look. In the photograph on our screen, we have three people trying to reach an apple from a tree. To help them out, they're all given an equally tall step stool in the name of equality. Everyone getting the exact same thing. Since they all have the same stool, do they all have the same chance of success in grabbing an apple? Yes or no? Put it in the chat box. Since they all have the same stool, do they all have the same chance of success in grabbing the apple? Y'all are smart, because you're right, no. Because some people are taller than others and others are shorter. Excuse me. A step stool might be just enough for someone, but realistically not that helpful for someone else. Even if on paper, we have equal, excuse me for one second. My apologies for that. Oh, you feel my pain. Thank you, Joe. A step stool might be just enough for someone, but realistically not that helpful for someone else. Carolyn has a good point. She says, I think the bigger problem is quote unquote fairness. It's used to justify sameness when people aren't starting from the same place. But is equality fair in this photo? Is it fair? Does everyone have the same chance of success? Questions that need answers. Questions that need answers. Absolutely. Good questions. Even if on paper we have equal opportunity to grab an apple, it doesn't mean that we have the same capability to do so. When we turn to the side on the right, we see that the height of the stools has been modified. So each person can reach the apple despite their varying heights. Each person has been accommodated to fit their needs so that they have an equal opportunity and capability to succeed. And really, at the foundation of equity is just that, ensuring fairness through thoughtful accommodation. Ensuring fairness through thoughtful accommodation. Which is better? Put this in the chat box. Equality or equity? In your opinion. Now, we've come to understand the difference between equity. Except the short person has a harder and higher jump to get on the stool. That's a very good point. That's a very good point. I don't know if I have a response to that. But that's a good point, Meg. Very good point. Good observation. And I think there's a lesson in that too, Meg, which is that, you know, just because the tools are there doesn't mean that you can access the tools that are provided to even achieve equity. So for example, that's a great point, Meg, because you have my mind spinning at this point. So a good practical example is if the city of Richmond were to decide that they were going to offer financial literacy courses. And these financial literacy courses would, I'm being very basic here, broad strokes, but bear with me, friends. These, you know, if you took this financial literacy course, you would get everything you need and you would be able to help, you know, bridge the gap, the wealth gap, right? But if that literacy course that's being provided, that is being equitable, right? If that course was only available at City Hall and there's no transportation from Southside over City Hall, is it really equity? Is it really equitable? It's not. It's not. I'm seeing things in the chat. I'm going to go back in. We can share our stool to help put the step stools to get to the final step stools. The most vulnerable must define fairness. Oh, that's a good point, Cindy. Thank you. I've been a beneficiary of equity. We all have, absolutely, whether we think about it or know it or not. Then the person's blamed for not taking advantage of the equity situation. Well, they had a chance, but did they have an equal chance of being successful? If they did not, then it wasn't equity to begin with. Absolutely. But let's talk about this word fair, because those that would oppose the work that we do, those that are that may be on the opposite side of our ideals here, and I'm using my words very carefully because of our we're a 501c4 organization. Those on the other side would say that equality equals fairness, and you'll very, very frequently hear the other side talk about equality, equality, equality. When in reality, what we want to be and where we really should be as a nation is a period of equity. They'll talk about fairness and what's fair. And I think it's so important for each and every one of us to frequently and to often push back against the notion that equality equals fairness, because it's not fair when you don't have an equal chance to succeed. Okay. And when we hear those things, it's so important that we push back. Okay. Let's go to our next slide on equity. I'm sorry. I'm seeing some great things in the comment. Yes, 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 yes. Equity. I don't, my slide here is incorrect. My slide here is incorrect. And we're going to get it corrected for the version that's sent out. Equity is not a noun. Equity is not a noun. No. Equity is a verb. Equity is a verb. Equity is an action. Well, by definition, all three components of DEI are actions. We are viewing equity as an action item. It's something that's pursued constantly. It's actively looking to reduce barriers of entry and ensure that everyone not only has the same opportunities, but a fair way of reaching those opportunities. Now, in our case, we're not going to be dealing with apple picking. We're working with more complex issues that affect people in different ways. And while the problems might be harder, the principle doesn't have to be. Look at handicap accessible ramps, for example. That's a keen example of equity in our daily lives. While it might be equal to have everyone go up the same 5 stairs to get inside of a restaurant, it's not fair. It's not equitable to those that may be in a wheelchair. Those ramps meet that circumstance where it is and allow everyone to get inside despite their personal capabilities. Now, there's a bit of irony there, and I see the comment in the chat. I'm going to get to it, but I want to get through this slide first. So bear with me if you'd be so kind. There's a bit of irony in there too. You could ask most Americans what they thought about handicaps in our country, and there's a pretty big chance they would say that they support them. Actually, as a matter of fact, 83% of Americans who've heard of the Americans with Disabilities Act support it. So why are other issues of equity so polarized? Issues like expanding accessibility to the ballot should theoretically just be an equitable means of supporting minority populations that are less likely to vote due to circumstances they can't control. Not to mention that many of those circumstances were facilitated by the United States past discrimination and systemic inequalities towards minority groups. The truth is, there's not one real answer. And while it may seem like basic equity to those who've taken the time to learn about it, it may not be so clear to other people and other groups. While we may not be able to directly control policy, be it in the General Assembly or in the workplace, we can share why it's so important to understand equity and why equality alone is not enough. Again, we're seeing here how equity is an action. It does not stop. It is our job to constantly review our systems and institutions and see how they could be more just. Ladies, this is the work of the League of Women Voters. For over 100 years, you all have been working towards ensuring equitable access to the ballot. First, it was making sure that women had the right to vote and had women's suffrage. And then it was making sure that women got registered to vote, making sure that women paid their poll taxes at the time because it was a thing. And then making sure that Black women could vote. And then making sure that access to the ballot was unfettered. Then it was redistricting. Then it was gerrymandering. So you've had a long history of equity. And ladies, it is your job. It is our job to also make sure that we are controlling the narrative. The same way that we would not allow anyone to, there's no politician. There's no politician, well, I don't know, 2016, there was no politician that would dare say a thing that was bad about the American with Disabilities Act. Because it's just common sense. It's fairness. It's equity. But somewhere along the lines, we have allowed others to control the narrative and to talk about opportunity and to talk about quote unquote fairness. We have to reclaim the narrative. Somebody put that in there. Somebody put that in the chat box. Reclaim the narrative, not just control it. We got to reclaim it because it's been taken away, y'all. Only 3 people see that we got to reclaim the narrative. Only 3 people. We got to have strong messaging. That's why it's so important that even in these conversations, internally and externally, we are using the correct language: diversity, equity, and then inclusion. We're not talking about equality. This is not one of those things that, you know, we can mix up, oh, diversity, equality, inclusivity. No, equity. Let's not allow others to define what's fair. We have to push back. We have to push back when other folks try to talk about opportunity and talk about fairness, because what's not fair is inequality. Hello, somebody. I want to get back to the question that was in the chat a little bit earlier, and I'm going to scroll up. I believe it was Cindy who says, I'm really having a difficult time with quote unquote fairness. That is subjective, and we need to make sure who defines fairness. Listen to that person or group and make changes to achieve equity. Pamela responded, she said, Cindy, that's why we have diverse voices, to hear from people who can help define equity ideally. If you're not a part of the marginalized group, you can't be defining anything. Or you shouldn't be. Am I right? Help me, somebody. So that being said, that's why it's important that we are building relationships with people outside of the folks that are in our generalized area, and we're building diverse and inclusive and equitable chapters. Let's talk about how does equity play a role in terms of our chapters. Okay, so when we talk about diversity, I gave you the example of, you know, tokenism. We talked about that. We talked about how we wouldn't want to be the only woman in a committee of 15. But how does equity play a role into how we operate a league chapter? I'm gonna ask you this. What time is your League of Women Voters chapter meeting? What time of day is it? Meg, you just hit the, you know, Meg, you need to come do this session because you are on top of it. Amanda said, while I'm at work. Hello, somebody. I think y'all already got this. Y'all are getting this together. We can go ahead and collect the offering and have the benediction. I'm Baptist, so that's what we would do. Evening meetings, 4 o'clock. Can somebody help me understand how a 4 o'clock meeting is equitable to somebody with 2 jobs and a child? I can't tell you, I literally don't know any Black women that I know personally that would be on a meeting at 4 o'clock. Do you? Well, clearly not, because that's why we're working on DEI. And that's okay. I know you're old. I get it. But how can we be more equitable? How can we be more equitable? How can we be more equitable in that? We do evenings or weekends only. That's not even that. I wouldn't even say that. So let's think creatively here. Let's be honest. Y'all, there's a tradition of having these meetings. I'm assuming that we're talking about on a weekday at 4 o'clock. Okay. Joan is shaking her head because she knows where I'm going. All right. What day of the week are we talking about? Monday, Friday, Thursday? Somebody give me a day. Thursday. Thursday's at 4 o'clock. There are only so many evenings. I get that. So let's think about it. Even if you have your meeting at 4 o'clock on a Thursday, how could you promote fairness? How could you promote justice? How could you provide an equitable arrangement for other folks on that you want to attract to the meeting? I have some ideas. So a couple things. One, maybe you could, I think the most radical approach is change your meeting time to, like, I don't know, 5 or 6 o'clock, right? One, but that might be a bit much. I acknowledge that. Okay, that's a lot for people. Y'all been having these 4 o'clock meetings since 1985, right? So I get it. But maybe you have another meeting that maybe is on a weekend, or maybe on an evening. And maybe before you make a major decision, you include the people who are able to attend both of those sessions so that you can get their input in it. And then you vote on it. Maybe you vote on it electronically. So, and you put the list of questions of what people are voting on and give people 48 hours to respond. So you're being equitable. Maybe you provide your committee reports via video, and you send out a video via email. So before the meeting, people have the opportunity to review the information. They can ask questions via email, right? Elaine said that some of the remote meetings have helped members to access them, especially in difficult times. Something good that may have come from the pandemic. Absolutely. A hybrid. Yes, my friends. Yes. But I want to be abundantly clear when I say this, and I say this out of the utmost love. Y'all know this. I love the league, all of these great things. You're not going to achieve equity in your chapter unless you do something different. And so if you leave this session this evening and you said, preach, Daquan, and you're like, this is wonderful, but you go back to your chapter and you don't change a darn thing, you are not practicing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I know that's hard for some people. It's okay. But the reality is, like Gladys just said, if nothing changes, nothing changes. So I need for you to really delve deep. I need for you at your next league meeting, it needs to be an agenda item. You need to think about how are we gonna make our chapter equitable? How are we gonna make it more accessible? You can't complain about it's only old people if you have it at 4 o'clock. I know it's radical, it's crazy, right? But am I telling something that's factually incorrect? So friends, I think I've touched that on enough. Y'all gotta figure that out. And that's okay. It's all right. But it sounds like that's an urgent action item we've got to figure out with the league, how we're going to be more equitable. Ooh, we talked about diversity. The main takeaway from diversity was what? What was the main takeaway? Include, not use, right? The main takeaway from equity is, what's the main takeaway from equity? Equity is an action, and we've got to take action. I think another question is, what are we meeting about? Ooh, Carolyn, you about to hit the nail on the head here. Absolutely, absolutely. Candy said, give people what they need to succeed. Denise says, first, don't tell someone to be quiet and stop speaking when the chairperson has acknowledged you. Sounds factual to me. Are we including or are we using diversity? Okay. It's gotten quiet, so that means that it must mean that this information is giving some. It's giving something to people. So I'm glad that it's helping people to be reflective. Okay. Next slide. Inclusion. With that being said, we're going to move to our last slide of the DEI trio. Not the last slide of the presentation. Inclusion. I really need to speed up because I'm moving a little slower than I thought. Okay. I'm glad this makes you think. This is likely the simplest of the three since it's something we're told from an early age, hopefully. Whether you were on the playground in elementary school or taking a sibling somewhere that was planned originally just for you and a friend, you've probably told to be inclusive. But in that respect, it could be argued that it's pretty similar to diversity. You're including people with alternative experiences and backgrounds, right? You are providing opportunities for inclusion. Inclusion was literally part of the definition for diversity, remember? If we go back a few slides. So how are these different? Inclusion is the result. It's the culmination of diversity and equity where a place creates an environment that is welcoming to everyone. Inclusion is met when you or your institution is truly inviting to all. So if you are practicing diversity, meaning that you are including and not using, and if you're practicing equity, which means that you are giving people what they need to succeed, and you're fostering that environment, then you will have inclusion. 1 + 1 = 2. When you are truly inviting to all, you cannot have inclusion. You cannot be inclusive if you're not diverse. You cannot have inclusion if you are not being equitable. Because how can you include people if they work in it during the time of y'all meeting? How can you be inclusive if you only have one group of people represented at the meeting? Questions on that? I'm going to move a little quickly over the next several slides. I didn't realize that this is really deep. Carolyn says churches use welcoming and affirming to be open to LGBTQ plus people. More than welcoming, it's a commitment to celebrate who people are, not ask them to be more like us. How can we be welcoming and affirming to other people besides the traditional makeup of the League of Women Voters? Elaine says inclusion needs to be real and not just the attempt to get the numbers up. Oh my God, that is just, it's powerful there. Elaine is right. It's got to be real. You can't just do this to get the numbers up, friends. How do we know it's real? How do we know if our efforts are real or if they're fake? Easy. Easy. Do people feel included? Inclusion is the result of diversity and equity. So the question is, do people feel included? Are they included? And it's more than just asking them a little question on a survey. It's, do people genuinely speak up? Are you fostering an environment where maybe someone who's traditionally quiet feels comfortable in speaking up at a meeting? Or do you let the same 5 people hog all the speaking time at the meeting? Are you proactively asking for, hey, such and such, we haven't heard your thoughts on this. We really would value your opinion. How do you feel about this? Not just allowing people to have the opportunity to sit and be quiet. The other thing is just being accessible. So throughout tonight, I hope I've demonstrated that by, for example, when we do things in the chat box, I try not to just go with the first people that say something, because some people may type a little slower or may just need time to process. Wait a few seconds and then allow people to speak. Because what you end up having is you have the same few people that speak up first. Do people stay? Are they actively involved? But here's the other good measure. Are the people that are coming in, are they bringing other people? I believe the Bible says that you will know them by their fruits. I'm paraphrasing there, but I believe there's a scripture that says that somewhere. Are they bringing other people? If I know if I join something and I like it, I'm going to, If I join something and I like it, I'm going to want my friends to be a part of it. Oh, Meg, let me tell you, y'all did not need me to come do this workshop because y'all know this stuff. Look at me. Also be willing to be vulnerable to negative concerns from a more diverse environment, which means when people have feedback, are you listening? Are you accepting it? Are you being receptive? Are you creating that safe space? Have you built the relationship where there is that level of trust and there is that bank that's been built up of trust to whereas that person can say something negative or say something very bad. And you know that it's coming from a good place and you think critically and take it constructively. Or do you just, this is them again. I can't, that she always has something bad to say. Makes you think, doesn't it? I do want to keep moving. So we've taken some time to learn about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've discussed the importance of promoting active diversity as opposed to passive diversity. And we've highlighted that diversity is a practice. We've noted the significant differences between equity and equality. We've established that equity is a constantly evolving action. And of course, we've talked about how inclusion is the result of successfully implementing diversity and equity within a space. Now we're going to take a few minutes to review these concepts and we're going to discuss a bit further. I did have an activity planned, but I believe that I'm going to forego that activity because I really want to get to Q&A because I want to make sure we can answer all your questions. So I do want to go over this slide. Diversity is a practice, equity is an action, and inclusion is the result. Diversity is a practice, equity is an action, and inclusion is the result. Let's talk about how we can reimagine DEI. Y'all, this is a complicated slide. It's long, but we're going to get through it, okay? Because I want to make sure we can get through this and then get to our Q&A. And actually, I think what I may do, let's get through this slide and then I'm gonna do Q&A. And if we have time, I'll finish the rest of the slides, but I wanna make sure you have plenty of time for questions and answers. And I believe, yes. So reimagining DEI. How do we turn these ideas we've talked about this evening into achievable goals? We have 6 main steps that we'll be looking at today. 6. In order, they are taking initiative, understanding implicit bias, combating microaggressions, embracing cultural acceptance, understanding identity, and finally, promoting DEI. Utilizing these steps is just as important as learning about the goals of DEI in the first place. These, my friends, are your action items that you're going to take back to your chapters. Your ticket to improving yourself, your chapter, the league, and society at large is these 6 steps to reimagining diversity, equity, and inclusion. Okay. Today's all about gaining new perspectives. And so I want you to really think through these steps from the frame of your personal story, but also think about it from the frame of someone who is a minority in racial or sexual orientation or a variety of different aspects, the minority in your league chapter. I had another activity here, but we don't have time for that activity. I feel so bad. What I want to do here, because this is so many good things. I want to take this as a stopping point. And what I want to do is open it up for Q&A at this time. Oh yes, it is not all about race. It is not all about race. Let's take a pause for a second. We've hit on some tough topics tonight. This has been a lot. Has this been heavy for anyone? Has this been challenging? I want to know in the comments. There's a lot of minorities, political affiliation as well. And just a friendly reminder for the recording that we are a 501c4 organization. We don't endorse or support candidates. It's a lot to think about. It's a lot. This is heavy. This is heavy stuff. And we haven't even gone through the 6 steps to reimagine DEI. I want to take a pause here because I don't want to rush through this. I want to make sure that we can answer questions. What questions do you have? And I would love for you, if you're so willing, to raise your hand using the raise hand feature so we can bring you up. I'd love to hear your question directly or possibly even see you. Okay, I see some hands raised. I'm gonna let Joan and Deb help me with that.
I'm unmuted. Is it okay for me to speak?
Go ahead, Denise.
Okay, well, I hope you can't see me. Is that right?
Yeah.
Because I'm not in my usual, okay?
It's okay.
It's a long story, but the big question is, I think you alluded to that. The league's issues are so great. And we have such a worthy causes and in areas related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I know that as all organizations, we are continuing to work on, I like that, the active version of that, to continue to be proactive and actively engaged in inclusion. The question I have, how, we're 100 years old, we're reaching out, but how do we get past the perception of our organization? Because the league is reaching out and doing these things. Plus, our issues are, again, worthy causes. How do we do it? I mean, it's not just social media and inviting people in. I am just curious, and I wouldn't mind if you wouldn't put me back on mute. I'll just listen. How do we do it?
Well, I want you to stay here because I want to answer the questions.
Oh, okay.
I'll ask you some questions as well. Of course, I'm going to have an NAACP reference here. So for those of you who don't know, in addition to my previous role serving as the 6th executive director of the Virginia State Conference NAACP, for 5 years, I served as one of the youngest members of our national board of directors. During that time period, I actually served through the periods of 3 presidents and CEOs. Ben Jealous, interim president CEO Lorraine Miller, Cornell Brooks, and then one of my last board meetings was when we hired Derek Johnson, actually 4 president CEOs. At the Centennial Convention of the NAACP in 2009, and y'all know I'm Baptist, so I'm gonna tell a story, but I promise you we're gonna get to it. So
okay, I'm coming. Just one moment.
At the NAACP was faced with a challenge. We said we knew we're an older organization. We struggled to gain the popularity of young people, X, Y, and Z. And what we ended up having to do over the course of multiple strategic plans and X, Y, and Z, one, it took leadership, but secondly, we had to do things differently. That's the first and foremost. First, you got to acknowledge the problem. Then secondly, you got to do something differently about it. And so to your point about it's not just posting on social media and being active, actually, to be frank with you, it can be that simple. It's not just posting on social media, but it's how you're posting, what you're posting. This is where it pays to actually bring in people who know what they're doing. Not just your niece or nephew because they're young and they know how to operate Facebook, but bring in, like you're bringing in me as an expert in DEI, right? Bring in an expert either at the chapter level or at the state level to help you navigate how do we run Facebook ads to talk about issues that our people care about. Admitting the fact that you have this challenge of perception. The NAACP 15, 20 years ago had some of the same challenges. It was an old organization, but now you look at the NAACP social media, it's changed. I'll be honest with you, the NAACP has changed so much, like even it's almost scary to me because I'm a diehard conservative traditional NAACPer. And that's just me being transparent and honest. So it has to evolve and it has to change. And at the chapter level, what that means is doing things differently to be equitable. One, I'm gonna keep saying this because it's startling to me. I want to be very clear. I don't know in whose mind you think a 4 p.m. meeting on a weekday is gonna attract anybody that is young or young at heart or has a child. That to me is baffling. And I want to be clear and honest because that's just who I am. That is a major concern. And you probably could get the number of more people if you just change your meeting time from 4 to 6 and marketed it a little differently. The same way you invest and like this workshop, you need to be investing in branding your chapter and being present, being open, and not just doing the same old same things. You've got to do things differently. I know this is a hard answer, it's a tough response, but I believe that's the reality of where we are. I know Denise has said that she may not be able to respond back, but if she does have something else to respond, you can either let us know or put it in the chat. She says, thank you. Okay, great. The next person I think was Marie Barnes. Also, if you don't mind sharing, because I know Denise is from Hampton, but I would love to know where you're calling in from, if you don't mind also sharing that.
Okay, are you referring to me?
Yes.
All right, good evening, everyone. I am calling from Northern Virginia. I'm a member of the Arlington Alexandria chapter, and I really have a comment more so than a question. Thank you, excellent presentation tonight. I put in the chat that I joined the league because of I said friend or sorority sister who was a member. And I was very interested. We're involved in, I'll say our sorority, if that's okay, Delta Sigma Theta sorority. We're partners, members of social action. And so I was very involved and very interested in what my soror was saying. The other thing I put in when you asked the question about, what are your feelings? Was this heavy for you? And I just want to share with you, I'm an African-American woman and it's heavy for me. So this is not something that's heavy for people who are not and I'll just use the word minority. Let me just use that. This is something that is heavy and is something that all of us need to, in my opinion, take a look at and learn and embrace and do things differently. So Daquan, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. And I'll be clear with you. I think I shared this with Joan and with Deb before the session a month ago. I said, this is going to be a heavy session. It's heavy for me to put this on. It's heavy. And so I want to acknowledge that. And I appreciate you for sharing that, because like we have been trying to say all evening, now I'm going to be very just upfront. Like one of the main lenses that I look through things in life and look through things just based on my lived experience is race. But that's not the totality of how we look through things and the totality of our experiences. And so DEI is not just about race. It's also about, we didn't even talk about the socioeconomic disparities. So, I mean, there's just, I wish I had another 2 hours to go through. But yes, thank you, Marie. I see another hand that's raised. Is it PD?
This is
Yeah.
Pat.
Pat, you should be, yeah. you
Oh,
should be-
yes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Oh, hi. Thank you. Yeah, DeQuan, this is like a breath of fresh air to hear you bring out a lot of the issues that are there, but nobody speaks on. I just wanted to throw this out because one of the things that I struggled with, we do have a very active DEI committee in our chapter. But initially, I was approached about helping to get that started. And one of the things I struggled with was I felt strongly that the women of color shouldn't necessarily have to take the lead on this. And I was happy to see that, yeah, I was really happy that there were other league members, our white sisters, allies who were willing to join the committee as well. But I just wanted to throw that out there, that I think that's something that I guess and again, I was the one that said this is not all about race, but if we are talking about race, I feel often that Black people feel like we always have to beat the drum, and we get it. But if our white allies really get it, they need to partner with us, and we'll be there with you and partner, which is actually what's happening in our chapter, which is great. But I just don't feel like we should not have to start it, because we already get it. And these are the things we've been saying for years. Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes total sense. And that's why, in my respectful opinion, that's why I think the key litmus test, if you will, is, are you including the Black person, or are you using the Black person? And that is obviously very subjective, right? And so for me, and I can only speak from my experience, I can't speak for yours or anyone else. For me, it's okay if you appointed the Black person to lead the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee that was made up of people who were equally as committed to the action of diversity, equity, and inclusion as a practice. Diversity being the practice, equity being the action, inclusion being the result, right? I think that where you have a challenge is when you have the Black person serving as chair, not having support from the chapter, from other people on the committee, and then that Black person as the chair having to practically beg the rest of the chapter to move forward with the DEI initiatives and programming. That, to me, those actions are where it appears that that person is being used as opposed to being included. It would be my perspective that, oh, absolutely, Meg, it should be out in the open. Let me tell you, that's why I am very just transparent, very direct on this conversation here. Because if we can't be direct in a family conversation that this is in the league, then there's no need in even trying to do DEI. None at all. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I would say, one, it depends on the person. Some people will feel more comfortable than not. I think also we have to recognize that we shouldn't necessarily always ask the Black person to be the lead, but we should be mindful of making sure that they have an opportunity if that's what they want to do. Where I would have a problem is where some of the main DEI challenges that your chapter faced dealt with race, but you didn't have racial diversity on the DEI committee, or y'all just decided to appoint a white person and didn't ask or include or invite that Black person into leadership. That's a challenging question. And honestly, it's so subjective. It really depends on the chapter. But honestly, that's where it's important that y'all can have that safe space, because you as a chapter should be able to have a safe space, or at least your executive and leadership team to be able to say, how do we come to a conclusion here? How do we fill the need of this chapter? Does that make sense? I'd love your response.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, DeQuan.
Is that helpful?
Yes, it is. And you brought it all together. So I appreciate that.
Good, good, good.
There's a question from Elaine in chat. I don't know if you saw it. How do you respond when somebody insists that fairness is equal to giving special priorities or favors?
You know, special priorities or favors, that is very much loaded language in my opinion. And I recognize that some people will not see it that way. We have to, one, be okay with disagreeing with people. Because the reality is, when we placate our position of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we placate to those that clearly are opposed to the idea of diversity as a practice, equity as an action, and inclusion as a result, we are only serving to be the opposite of allies to the mission of DEI. This, my friend, is where we have to stand up for our values the same way that other folks. It's okay to disagree. It's okay to leave a conversation, disagree, to leave a conversation and say, I respectfully disagree with that. That's not my perspective, and to move on. But please, this is where I think it can be challenging, especially, well, I can only say I think because I'm not a white person and I don't have that lived experience, but I believe that that's where folks kind of get into that challenge or trouble area, because rather than hold their ground and be a true ally and say, you're wrong, sometimes folks can placate and say, oh, okay, yeah, I hear you, X, Y, and Z. And to that, I would say, how would you respond to folks that say, oh, well, we don't need an ERA because we have a woman who's the vice president? Now, none of y'all on this call would let me say that. Would you? You would not, because you're the League of Women Voters. And if you're going to be true allies in this process, and this is a hard conversation, y'all, you've got to stand up. The same way you wouldn't allow me to say that the ERA was not needed because we have a woman as vice president, a woman as Speaker of the House, and we have a Black woman now about to be on the Supreme Court. You've got to stand up for your values.
There's another question Carolyn has. Is it more effective to have a DEI committee or to include DEI in all activities? And if I could sneak one in, we had some of our members who are white who were afraid to be on the DEI committee because they felt like they were imposters, that they didn't have the right to do that. So we had sort of a reverse, and we're still working through that.
Y'all, that's a great question. That's such a great question. Here's my answer. That's why at the very beginning of this conversation, the very beginning, the first thing I said is that we've got to level set and we've got to create a safe space. In my opinion, the reality is when those types of situations and challenges, the reason why folks may feel, oh, I can't tell you why or how they feel that way, but I think that a lot of this could be avoided if we were, one, open and honest and had safe spaces for folks to have that dialogue, and for the chapter to be inclusive and to recognize the difficulties that people come into that situation. And that's when we practice our inclusivity by, one, acknowledging the fact that this is a challenge, this is a problem. We are promoting inclusivity, promoting diversity rather, by including folks, not just using them, right? Which is what people seem to want to avoid in that situation. We're practicing equity by making sure it's accessible. So by making it clear at the beginning of the conversation, this committee is accessible to all. My question is, how was creating that DEI committee even framed? Was it framed that we wanted to be everyone to be a part of it? Or was it framed as, well, we got to check this box, y'all, for the league. We don't get, you know what? The national said we're not getting that little grant if we don't get this DEI together. So we need to get that committee on board, right? So the other thing in terms of the DEI committee and having DEI as a part of all your activities, that brings up an interesting question. A part of me wants to say you should have a framework by which everything you do, you are thinking about it from a DEI lens. So think about it, right? How are you including and not using people in every program you have? How are you promoting equity by making sure things are accessible? And how are you making sure that you're being inclusive as a result of those other two, right? I think you should probably put together a framework by which you think about that and think through that for every activity, every meeting, until it becomes a habit, right? It takes time to develop these practices. And again, we can have a powerful conversation like the one we're having tonight, and you can go home and then have your next chapter meeting and say, you know, we had such a great DEI session. We had a phenomenal presenter. We had a very heavy and interesting, thought-provoking conversation. But what action are you going to take is the question. So yes. Denise asked for me to explain something. I'm not sure which comment you'd like me to explain. While Denise is saying that, I do want to address something that Mary, I can't see the full name, Crutchfield says. So Mary says a DEI committee, can help bring speakers for programs like this to enlighten and educate us. I am actually going to push back against that. And here's why. So, at this point, you know what diversity, equity, and inclusion is. You don't need another session that explains what diversity, equity, and inclusion is. And keep having that conversation, and you sit there and listen to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Your next step is not to sit around and think about, oh, who can we invite next to talk about diversity? Your next step should be, what are the action items I can take? Now, I think if there's, I hope you've gotten the main action item I have presented to all these chapters on this call tonight about equity and accessibility, right?
Okay, so
Yeah.
my
Go ahead.
comment, I'm sorry, I thought you were finished. Go ahead, please.
No, go ahead, yeah.
So my comment was mainly directed towards Joan when she said she had some people who felt, I think they were, I didn't understand that. They were, quote, imposters if they showed up on a DEI committee, as if diversity, equity, and inclusion did not include everyone, and that includes different ethnicities or religions or orientations or disabilities, etc. I guess I was trying to really process that comment.
So I don't want to speak on behalf of Joan, but
Right.
do you mind if I address that first, Joan, before you respond?
Sure, go ahead.
Joan's question and comment brings up a very good perspective, and it's actually, unfortunately, and we didn't get to implicit bias and all that because I have like 20 more slides that we didn't get to, but the direct answer to that is individuals who think of themselves as, oh, I don't want to be an imposter by sitting on this committee, or I'm not worthy to sit on this committee. You may, in reality, have a heightened, inflated sense of your own self, to whereas you think that you are different from the rest of the group. In reality, we all are diverse. We all have something to contribute to DEI. Having the mindset and perspective, and we don't have, unfortunately, time to delve as deep as I would love to go to on this topic, but if you come into it with the mindset of, oh, well, I'm too good to be on the DEI committee, or I feel like, you know, this is for the minorities, and I want to give voice to them. That's actually doing yourself and the chapter a great disservice. And I don't mean to say that to be, negative towards anyone, but the reality is this is where implicit bias comes in. This is where our own lived experiences have a role to play into how we think about DEI and how we ultimately implement it.
Yeah, these people didn't come from, I'm better. They came from, being, a privileged white person, how am I going to tell people how to do DEI? I'm going to look, like a fool. I'm going to not be able to represent it. Am I being an imposter? And they were just concerned about coming across as, all right, I'm going to tell you how to do DEI because I've never had a problem in my life. And it, it's a legitimate concern and something we're still talking about. And they're coming to your point, but it's just a concern that they had. And I felt it had to be addressed.
I agree with you. I think, again, the crux of all of this here is that you've got to create that space in your chapter where you can have open, honest, frank dialogue. And to Carolyn's comment, and hey, Deborah, it's get to see your name in the chat box. But to Carolyn's question about, I definitely understand that, sometimes people want to have a space where they're not, for minorities, where they're not being watched or what have you from people outside of that group. I would say that if that's the case, then that's not the role of that diversity committee. That should be a separate committee or separate conversation. But DEI has to involve everyone because it's the total opposite of DEI to just put put the Black people and the Hispanic, Latino people and the Indigenous people on the DEI committee to tell y'all what to do. That's not how this works. And frankly, the DEI committee shouldn't be telling anyone what to do. It should be providing a framework and providing the space and being an accountability measure. The DEI committee should be saying, hey, this is not accessible. Having a meeting at 4:00 on a weekday. That's not accessible. That's not equity. It's not equitable. Right? That's the role of DEI. So I think that's a broader question. You have to think about what's the role of DEI.
You had two in Q&A. I don't know.
So let's go to that. Those will probably be our last two. I know we're approaching on time and I don't want to hold people over time. Okay. How do we promote diversity, equity, and inclusion more about race and sexual orientation? I think that we've kind of done that throughout the entire presentation. But what I would say is it's not about just promoting. And I don't like when people say we're promoting DEI because this is not a flashy news thing that we're marketing. We have to live it. We have to take action, meaning DEI should be a part of how we think and view the world. Okay, so it's a framework that we should apply to our daily lives, but more or less to our work in the league. And it takes a while for us to develop those habits. Evelyn asked me to explain microaggressions. I would love to answer that. Briefly speaking, it is intentionally avoiding unintentional discrimination. That's how we address microaggressions. I wish we had more time. I would love to delve deeper and actually I have a whole slide on that. But this conversation really has gone longer than I thought. I thought I didn't have enough content for 2 hours, and clearly we did. Sometimes it's not possible to provide equity in every situation. I hear you. I struggle with that in some instances. It rationally does make sense. I just don't know how to unpack that. And I should have said this at the beginning. We're not going to be able to unpack everything in one session. Yes. Okay, I wish I could have gone over. I know, I do. So we've answered as many of the questions as we can. I want to turn it back over to Deb and John. I want to say thank you for having. I hope that this has been a helpful session. We definitely have much more. Would love to, anything I can do, come back if you want to do another one and finish or what have you. But I just want to let y'all know I'm so grateful to the league for having me this evening. I truly do hope that you're leaving better than the whence than the way you came today. So I'll turn it back over to Joan and Deb.
Daquan, thank you so much. And I think I heard you say you'd be willing to come back again. And
Of course, anything for y'all.
That's right. Joan and I are already scheming. So a real pleasure to have you. Yeah, I think things got quiet because it's a lot to process. So thank you for giving us so much to chew on, and it was great seeing you again. So thank you, and thank everyone for taking your time out tonight. If there's a statewide primary in your area tomorrow, go vote, and have a great evening.
Thank you so much.